The cold in northern New Mexico doesn't just bite, it gnaws. It seeps through the thickest wool, settles deep in your bones, and stays there like an unwelcome guest until the spring thaw. For 2 years, that cold had been my constant companion, a physical manifestation of the hollowness in my chest since I buried Alina. Our cabin, nestled against the jagged maw of the Rio Grande Gorge, was more fortress than home, a defense against the wind, the snow, and the crushing silence. That silence was the hardest part. It was a living thing, broken only by the crackle of piñon wood in the stove or the sound of my son, Leo, humming to himself as he lined up his small collection of carved wooden animals on the rough-hewn floor. He was 8, with Alina's dark, serious eyes and a quiet resilience that both amazed and terrified me. He was all I had left of her. He was all I had, period. My entire world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this cabin and the snow-dusted expanse of sagebrush and ponderosa pine that stretched out from our door. That afternoon, the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, the color of old pewter. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, muffling the world and making everything look clean and deceptively peaceful. Leo, bundled in a red snowsuit that made him look like a little cherry tomato, was getting restless. "Can I go build a snow fort, Dad? By the big rocks." His voice was a small, hopeful puff of white vapor in the chilly air of the main room. I hesitated, my gaze drifting to the rifle resting on its pegs above the door. It was a habit, a constant, low-grade thrum of anxiety. The wilderness that provided our solitude also harbored dangers. "Stay where I can see you," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Don't go near the canyon edge. Not even close, understand?" "I know, Dad." He gave me the look, the one that said he was a big boy, that he understood the rules. I watched from the window as he trudged out, his small boots leaving a trail of deep impressions in the perfect white blanket. He started his work near a cluster of large basalt boulders that marked the informal boundary of our yard. A good 50 yards from the cabin, but well within sight. I turned back to sharpening my axe, the rhythmic scrape of stone against steel a familiar meditative sound. Maybe 10 minutes passed. The only sound was the shush-shush of the whetstone. Then, a different sound pricked my ears. A frantic crunching of snow, too fast for a child playing. My head snapped up. I looked out the window and my blood ran cold. Leo was running. Scrambling, really, his small legs pumping desperately as he fled back toward the cabin. And behind him, loping with an unnatural, terrifying grace, was a wolf. It wasn't just a wolf, it was a monster. Its fur was the color of charcoal and shadow, its frame bigger than any coyote or stray dog. It was massive, its shoulders thick with muscle, its long legs eating up the distance between it and my son with a horrifying ease. Its head was low, its focus absolute. It wasn't hunting for food. It was a heat-seeking missile, locked onto the small, bright red target of my son's snowsuit. Leo. The name was ripped from my throat, a raw, useless sound swallowed by the vastness. There was no time to think, only to act. The axe clattered to the floor as I lunged for the rifle. My hands, usually steady, fumbled with the cold steel. I slammed a round into the chamber, the metallic clack a small, defiant sound against the drumming in my ears. I wrenched the cabin door open, the icy wind a slap to the face. I didn't even feel it. I braced myself against the doorframe, bringing the stock to my shoulder. Leo screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror as he stumbled and fell. The wolf was almost on him. 10 yards. 5, my heart seized. The world narrowed to the V-notch of my iron sights. I centered the bead on the wolf's shoulder, leading it just a fraction. I had to be sure. A miss could hit Leo. A poorly placed shot would only enrage it. The thought was paralyzing, but instinct took over. I held my breath, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle's roar shattered the frozen afternoon. The crack of the shot echoed off the canyon walls, a sound that felt like it could split the sky. The wolf yelped, a strangled canine cry of shock and pain. It stumbled, its powerful legs buckling. It rolled once in the snow, a chaotic explosion of white powder and dark fur, and then lay still. For a moment, everything was silent again, save for the ringing in my ears and Leo's ragged sobs. He was on his feet, staring, his face pale with shock. I ejected the spent casing, the hot brass shell skittering onto the porch, and kept the rifle trained on the still form. "Leo, get inside, now!" My voice was a command forged in pure adrenaline. He scrambled the rest of the way, bursting through the door and into my arms, burying his face in my jacket. I held him tight, my body trembling with the aftershock of terror. I could feel his heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking his hair. "It's okay, son. You're safe. I got you." After a few minutes, his sobbing subsided into shuddering breaths. I needed to make sure the wolf was dead, not just wounded. Leaving Leo huddled by the fire, I told him, "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anything." He nodded, his big eyes still wide with fear. Rifle held at the ready, I walked slowly across the snow, my own boots now trampling the pristine canvas. The metallic smell of gunpowder hung in the air, sharp and acrid. The wolf hadn't moved. As I got closer, I could see the dark stain of blood spreading out from its shoulder, a stark crimson against the snow. It was dead. The relief was so profound it made me dizzy. I stood over the creature. It was even bigger up close, a magnificent, terrifying animal. Its teeth were bared in a silent, final snarl. I nudged its flank with the barrel of my rifle. Nothing. It was then that my eyes caught something out of place. Something against the dark fur of its neck. It wasn't a tag or a collar in the traditional sense. It was thin, metallic, glinting faintly in the flat gray light. My breath hitched. I knelt, my rifle falling forgotten into the snow beside me. A piece of worn leather cord, almost like a shoelace, was tied around the animal's thick neck. And hanging from that cord was a ring. A simple, slender silver band with a single, small turquoise stone set in its center. My world tilted on its axis. My heart stopped. I knew that ring. I had slid it onto Alina's finger on our wedding day. I had held her hand, that ring cool against my palm, as she took her last breath. I had buried that ring with her 2 years ago in a coffin 6 feet under the frozen New Mexico dirt. And now, it was here, hanging around the neck of a dead wolf. Time seemed to fracture, splitting into a million sharp-edged shards of ice. My breath hitched in my chest, a ragged, useless thing. The world narrowed to that single, impossible point of focus. The glint of silver against the coarse, dark fur of the dead wolf. The wind, which had been a constant companion all afternoon, seemed to die, leaving an absolute, ringing silence broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart and Leo's quiet, gulping sobs behind me. "Dad," Leo's voice was small, a fragile thread in the vast, cold emptiness. Is it really gone?" His question snapped me back, but only partially. It was like trying to surface from the deepest part of the ocean. I forced myself to turn, to put my body between my son and the monstrous paradox lying in the snow. I knelt, my knees cracking in protest, and pulled him into a hug that felt more like I was holding myself together. His small body trembled violently against mine. I was all he had, and right now, I was a man teetering on the edge of sanity. "It's gone, buddy. It's gone. You're safe," I murmured into his hair, my voice a rough, unfamiliar sound. My eyes were still fixed over his shoulder, locked on the wolf. On the ring, it couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination born from the violent spike of adrenaline and the deep, festering well of my grief. The mind, they say, can play cruel tricks. 2 years of isolation, of replaying every moment with Alina, of wrestling with her absence, it was enough to break anyone. Maybe I was finally broken. "Let's get you inside," I said, my words mechanical. I had to get him away from this. I had to get myself a moment to think, to let reality reassert itself. I helped him to his feet, my hand firmly on his back, guiding him toward the cabin. Every step felt like wading through mud. Don't look back, I told myself. Just get him inside, get the fire going, make him some hot cocoa, be a father. But my gaze was a traitor, pulled magnetically back to the still form. The ring was still there. It wasn't a mirage. Once Leo was inside, wrapped in a thick wool blanket by the cold hearth, I told him, "Stay here. I need to take care of something. Lock the door behind me." He nodded, his eyes wide and trusting, and I felt a fresh pang of guilt. He just survived a terrifying attack, and his father was about to walk back out to the thing that had caused it, acting like a madman. I stepped back out, closing the heavy wooden door behind me. The click of the lock was a definitive sound, sealing me in the world of the impossible. The cold bit at my exposed skin. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine, blood, and the metallic tang of spent gunpowder. My rifle was still clutched in my hand, its weight a familiar but insufficient comfort. Slowly, deliberately, I approached the wolf. It was even larger up close, a creature of brutal power, now inert and lifeless. Its fur was thick, a mix of gray, black, and hints of brown, matted with blood on its flank where my shot had found its mark. Its eyes were open, glassy, reflecting the vast, indifferent New Mexico sky. But I barely saw any of that. I saw the leather cord around its neck. It was old, worn, and tied with a simple, secure knot. My hand trembled as I reached out. The fur was coarse and surprisingly warm, the life not yet fully fledged from the body. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I fumbled with the knot, my fingers numb and clumsy. It wouldn't give. Frustration, hot and raw, surged through me. I pulled my hunting knife from its sheath on my belt, the blade gleaming in the fading light. With a single, decisive slice, I cut the cord. The ring fell into my waiting palm. It was cold, heavy, real. I stumbled back a few steps, my eyes devouring it. It wasn't a similar ring. It was her ring. The hammered silver band, custom-made by an old artist in Santa Fe. The single, oblong turquoise stone, the color of a robin's egg, with its unique spiderweb of dark brown matrix that I would recognize anywhere. I used to joke that the lines in the stone looked like a map of the canyons we loved to explore. My thumb instinctively went to the inside of the band, tracing the faint, worn inscription. Semper Juntos, C+E always together. A memory, vivid and agonizing, ambushed me. Elena on our wedding day, standing under the ancient cottonwood tree behind her parents' house in Chimio. The sun in her dark hair, the way she laughed as I slid this very ring onto her finger, her hand warm and alive in mine. "A map to keep you from getting lost, Caleb," she had whispered, tapping the turquoise, "so you can always find your way back to me." I squeezed my eyes shut, a sound escaping my throat that was half sob, half strangled cry. The memory was a paradise and a torment. I had buried this ring with her. I had placed it on her finger myself, her skin cold even then, in the sterile quiet of the mortuary. I had watched as her casket was lowered into the hard, unforgiving earth of the small cemetery 2 towns over. It was supposed to be with her. Semper Juntos. How in God's name was it here, around the neck of a wolf that tried to kill my son? My mind raced, desperately seeking a logical foothold. Grave robbers. It was a remote, humble cemetery, not a place that would attract thieves. And even if they did rob her grave, why take only the ring? And why put it on a wolf? It was insane. A prank? Who would be so monstrously cruel? We kept to ourselves. We had no enemies. No one even knew the significance of that specific piece of jewelry but me. I looked from the ring in my palm to the dead animal, then toward the distant, snow-dusted peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The wilderness I had once seen as a place of harsh beauty and solitude now felt menacing, imbued with a secret intelligence that was actively hostile. It felt like the land itself was mocking my grief, turning my most sacred memory into a grotesque horror show. Shoving the ring deep into my pocket, the metal cold against my thigh, I grabbed the wolf by its hind legs. The sheer weight of it was staggering. I couldn't leave it here, so close to the cabin, a gruesome trophy of the day's madness. With a grunt, I began dragging it away, toward the dense line of pinon and juniper trees that bordered our property, the carcass leaving a dark, smeared trail in the snow. My mind was a storm, a chaotic whirlwind of impossible questions, but one thought burned brighter than the rest. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The air inside the old shed was thick with the ghosts of forgotten tasks, the metallic tang of rusted tools, the earthy scent of dried mud, and the faint, sweet smell of spilled gasoline. Now, a new, primal odor overwhelmed them all, the coppery stench of blood and damp fur. I heaved the wolf's body onto a dusty tarp, the dead weight of it a grotesque parody of the powerful creature it had been just an hour ago. My muscles screamed in protest, but the physical strain was a welcome distraction, a brute force anchor against the storm raging in my mind. Leo was inside, probably watching cartoons, the manufactured cheer a flimsy shield against the day's trauma. I told him I needed to take care of things, a vague, adult phrase that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a profound lie. Every action I took was a betrayal of the simple, honest world I had tried to build for him after Alina was gone. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, my fingers closing around the cold, familiar circle of the ring. It felt like a hot coal and a piece of ice at the same time. Proof. It was undeniable proof of what? That was the question that hammered at the inside of my skull with the force of a blacksmith's forge. My mind, desperate for logic, offered up explanations, each one more flimsy than the last. Grave robbers. It was the most obvious, most rational explanation. But here, miles from any real town, in a small community cemetery where everyone knew everyone, what would they even be looking for? Alina was buried with nothing of value except this ring. And even if they had stolen it, why tie it around a wolf's neck? It was a prank of monstrous cruelty, a theatrical gesture that made no sense. My thoughts spiraled. Had someone I knew done this? An old enemy. I had no enemies to speak of. My life was work, Leo, and the quiet hum of survival. The idea of someone harboring a grudge so deep and bizarre that they would desecrate my wife's grave, and then use an animal to deliver this horrifying message felt like something out of a cheap thriller, not my life. I grabbed a shovel, its wooden handle smooth and worn from years of use. Digging, that was the answer. I needed to dispose of the carcass before Leo's curiosity got the better of him. I found a spot behind the shed where the piñon pines grew thick and the ground was softer. The rhythmic scrape and thud of the shovel hitting the rocky soil became a desperate mantra. Scrape, thud, it's not possible. Scrape, thud, it can't be real. Scrape, thud, but it is. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the Jemez Mountains in fiery strokes of orange and purple. It was the kind of sunset Alina had loved, the kind that made her stop whatever she was doing and just watch, her hand in mine. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, and I leaned on the shovel, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Grief, which had been a constant, dull ache for 2 years, was now sharp, serrated, and twisted into something new and terrifying. This wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about violation. With the wolf buried under a mound of dark earth and stones, I stood sweating in the rapidly cooling air, my body aching, my mind no clearer than before. The silence of the wilderness pressed in, no longer a comfort but a container for my fear. The wind whispering through the pines sounded like a voice I couldn't quite make out. I felt watched. The feeling was so intense, so palpable, that I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was nothing there, just the deepening twilight and the endless expanse of trees. I couldn't live with this. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't look my son in the eye and pretend his world was safe when I felt like I was losing my mind. The doubt was a poison, and there was only one antidote, however terrible. I had to see her grave. The thought alone felt like a sacrilege. It was a place of peace, of memory. The small, hand-carved wooden cross I'd made, the smooth stones Leo and I placed there every month. It was our sacred ground. The idea of going there with a shovel in the back of my truck, with the intent to unearth my own sorrow, was nauseating. But the alternative, living with this jagged question mark hanging over my wife's memory, was worse. I cleaned myself up as best I could at the outdoor spigot, the cold water shocking my skin. I walked back into the house, forcing my face into a mask of calm. Leo was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes wide. The TV was off. "Is the wolf gone, Dad?" he asked, his voice small. "It is, buddy," I said, my own voice sounding hollow in my ears. I sat next to him, pulling him into a hug. He felt so fragile. "It won't ever bother you again. I promise." "Was it a bad wolf?" I swallowed hard, the lie catching in my throat. "It was just a wild animal, Leo. It didn't know any better." I held him for a long moment, breathing in the scent of his hair, trying to draw strength from him. I had to do this. For him, for Alina, for my own sanity. I tucked him into bed, read him an extra story, and waited until his breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. Then, I went to my room and opened the small wooden box where I kept my important things. I placed Alina's ring inside, the silver and turquoise dark against the velvet lining. Closing the lid felt like a final, terrible commitment. Grabbing a heavy flashlight and the keys to my old Ford pickup, I stepped out into the night. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, offering little light. The air was cold now, biting at my exposed skin. As I started the engine, its roar shattering the immense quiet, I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. My focus was singular, a pinpoint of dreadful purpose. The 2-mile drive to St. James Cemetery, where I would either find an empty patch of disturbed earth or lose my grip on reality entirely. The drive to St. James Cemetery was a journey through a vacuum. The headlights of my old Ford F-150 cut a lonely tunnel through the immense, ink-black dark of the high desert. Outside that fragile beam of light, the world ceased to exist, swallowed by the plains and the moonless sky. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires as I turned off the main highway onto the unpaved service road. Inside the cab, the silence was a physical weight, pressing in on me, amplifying the frantic thumping in my chest. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and the small, cold weight of Alina's ring in my jacket pocket felt like a shard of ice against my skin. St. James was not a place for the living, especially not at night. It was a relic, a forgotten patch of consecrated ground a few miles out of town, populated by the weathered granite and sandstone markers of families who had worked this land for generations. As I pulled up to the sagging wrought iron gate, I cut the engine and the lights. The sudden plunge into darkness and silence was absolute. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath fogging the cold glass of the windshield. The wind whispered through the brittle branches of the junipers and pinyon pines that dotted the grounds, a dry, sibilant sound that scraped at my nerves. This was a mistake, a desperate, foolish idea born of shock and grief. I should go home, hold Leo, and pretend today never happened. But I couldn't. The image of the ring, Alina's ring, on that filthy cord around the wolf's neck was burned into my mind. The uncertainty was a poison, and this was the only antidote I could imagine. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I pushed the door open. The cold night air hit me instantly, sharp and clean with the scent of dust and pine. I'd brought a heavy mag light, but I left it on the passenger seat. I didn't want to announce my presence, even to the dead. The faint starlight provided just enough of a ghostly luminescence to see the dark shapes of the headstones rising from the earth like crooked teeth. I pushed open the creaking gate, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness, and stepped inside. My boots crunched softly on the gravel path. Every step was deliberate, heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast quiet. The cemetery was a maze of memories and sorrow. The Abitas, the Romeros, the Montoyas, names I'd known my whole life. Men I'd worked with, women who had smiled at me in the grocery store. Now they were just names carved in stone. My pace quickened slightly. I knew the way to Alina's plot by heart, but my feet felt like lead. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the newer section near a weathered wooden cross was her headstone. Simple, unadorned granite, just as she'd wanted. Alina Ortiz, beloved wife and mother. I stopped about 10 feet away, unable to move closer. The air left my lungs in a rush, as if I'd been punched. The last time I stood here was for the burial. I remembered the cold, the hollow sound of the first shovelful of dirt hitting the coffin, the finality of it all. The grief I had managed to pack down and contain for 2 years tore open, raw and bleeding. My eyes burned, but no tears came. It was a cold, sharp ache deep in my soul. Forcing my legs to move, I walked the final few steps and stood over the grave. My gaze was fixed on the headstone, on her name. I couldn't bring myself to look down at the ground. Not yet. I was terrified of what I might find, and even more terrified of what I might not. This was the moment of truth. Either there was a logical, if monstrous, explanation, or I was losing my mind. Finally, I knelt. The rough, cold dirt pressed into the knees of my jeans. I took out my phone, its screen providing a weak, clinical light that felt like a sacrilege in this place. I swept the light over the plot of earth in front of the headstone. My breath caught in my throat. The ground was firm, packed, and settled. Small, hardy tufts of grama grass had begun to reclaim the soil, their pale, dry blades undisturbed. There were no marks from a shovel, no piles of discarded earth, no muddy footprints other than the ones I was currently making. I reached out a trembling hand and pressed my palm flat against the ground. It was cold and unyielding. Solid, it was untouched. "No," I whispered, the sound stolen by the wind. It couldn't be. I moved the phone's light back and forth, frantically scanning the perimeter of the plot, looking for any sign, any slight inconsistency. There was nothing. It was exactly as it should be, a place of rest that had not been violated. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, the quiet cemetery suddenly spinning. The grave robbery theory, the one anchor of logic I had clung to all day, had been a lie. It wasn't true. The earth that held my wife, the woman I had personally laid to rest with her wedding ring on her finger, had not been opened. A frantic, desperate energy surged through me. I started clawing at the dirt with my bare hands, my fingers scraping against pebbles and dry roots. I had to be missing something. The explanation had to be here. I dug until my fingernails were packed with soil and my knuckles were raw, but it was useless. A few inches down, the earth was even more compacted, undisturbed for 2 years. I collapsed back on my heels, gasping for air. The silence was no longer empty, it was mocking. The stars seemed to glitter with cold, indifferent amusement. The ring in my pocket now felt impossibly heavy, a tangible piece of an impossible reality. If no one had dug her up, how did her ring get from her finger, 6 feet under the ground, onto a wolf that was hunting my son? The question echoed in the vast, empty space of my mind, and for the first time, I felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated fear. This wasn't about theft or desecration anymore. It was about something else. Something I couldn't understand and couldn't fight. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled back towards the gate, my heart pounding with a new, terrifying rhythm. I didn't look back. I threw myself into my truck, fumbled with the keys, and roared the engine to life, shattering the sacred quiet. I drove away from that place as fast as I could, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wasn't leaving the horror behind. I was taking it with me. The drive back from St. James Cemetery was a hollow, empty thing. The rattling of my old pickup truck over the washboard dirt road was the only sound that pierced the thick blanket of silence in the cab, a silence that felt heavier than any noise. My mind, which had been a frantic storm of theories and fears on the way there, was now a vacuum. The pristine, untouched earth of Alina's grave had been a far more devastating sight than any desecration could ever be. A dug-up grave would have been horrifying, a violation, but it would have been an answer. It would have been human. This was impossible. The logic I had clung to, the thin thread of grave robbery, had snapped, plunging me into a free fall through a darkness I couldn't comprehend. Snow began to fall again, thick, wet flakes that smeared across the windshield before the weary wipers could sweep them away. The world outside was reduced to a swirling vortex of white and black, a perfect mirror for the chaos inside me. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and the cold metal of Alina's ring, now tucked deep in my pocket, felt like a branding iron against my thigh. It was a tangible piece of an impossible puzzle, real, solid, and yet it shouldn't exist. Not here, not now. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was dark save for the small nightlight in the hallway I always left on for Leo. The engine sputtered and died, and the sudden quiet was deafening. For a long moment, I just sat there, the falling snow muffling the world, feeling like a stranger at my own home. This house, once a sanctuary built on love and shared dreams, now felt like it held its breath, guarding secrets I was never meant to know. Shaking off the paralysis, I got out and moved quietly into the house. The familiar scent of pine and wood smoke did little to soothe me. I checked on Leo first. He was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, innocent rhythm, his face untroubled. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over me, immediately followed by a cold tide of guilt. I was hiding this monstrous reality from him, this gaping wound in the fabric of our lives. But how could I tell him? What could I possibly say? Back in the living room, I sank onto the couch, my gaze falling on the framed photos on the mantelpiece. Us on our wedding day, Alina radiant, her smile so wide it crinkled the corners of her eyes. Us holding a newborn Leo, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated joy. I stared at her face, searching for something I'd missed. A shadow, a flicker of doubt, a hint of the secret she must have carried. The thought felt like a betrayal. I was desecrating her memory in a way no grave robber ever could, doubting the one person I had trusted with my entire soul. But what other choice did I have? The impossible had happened, and I had to find a new path to the truth. Logic had failed me. The physical world had offered no clues. The answer had to be somewhere else. It had to be with her. A new resolve, born of desperation, hardened within me. I stood and walked toward our bedroom, a space that had remained largely untouched since she passed, a museum of our life together. Her scent, a faint trace of lavender and vanilla, still lingered in the air. It used to be a comfort. Now it was haunting. I opened her closet. Her clothes hung neatly, a row of familiar patterns and fabrics. I ran my hand over the sleeve of her favorite wool sweater, half expecting to feel her warmth. My search was aimless at first. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just something, an anomaly, a clue. I opened her jewelry box on the dresser. The cheap costume jewelry she loved, the silver earrings I'd bought her at a Santa Fe market, the delicate chain her mother had given her. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the glaringly empty slot where her wedding ring belonged. Seeing it empty only twisted the knife deeper. Then I saw it. Tucked away on the top shelf of the closet, behind a stack of old blankets, was a small, dark wooden box. It was a simple thing, carved with interlacing vines, and it was locked. I remembered it well. She called it her memory box, a place for things too private or precious for display. I had never asked what was inside. Her privacy was a boundary I had always respected. Now, that boundary felt like a wall I had to tear down. My heart hammered against my ribs. I remembered seeing a small, ornate key on the ceramic dish on her nightstand where she kept loose change and hairpins. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It fit the lock perfectly. With a soft click, the box opened. It was filled with the ephemera of a life. A few faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, a pressed wildflower, a ticket stub from a concert we never went to together. My hope began to wither. It was just a collection of sentimental trinkets. But then, underneath a bundle of old letters tied with a ribbon, my fingers brushed against a small velvet pouch. It was heavy for its size. With a sense of dread, I pulled it out. The drawstring was tight. I fumbled with it, my fingers clumsy and numb. Tipping the contents into my palm, I found not another piece of jewelry, but two items. The first was a single, antique silver key, heavy and ornate, with a complex, unfamiliar crest on its head. The second was a piece of paper, folded into a tight square and yellowed with age. I set the key aside and carefully unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in Alina's familiar, elegant script. But the words I read made the world tilt on its axis. It didn't begin with "My dearest Caleb." It began, "Daniel." I read on, my blood turning to ice. If you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and the promise we made can no longer be kept in silence. I'm so sorry to leave this burden to you, but you are the only one who can see it through. Go to our safe place. The key is with this letter. You need to know the truth about what happened at the Black Creek Reserve. Please forgive me. The letter fell from my nerveless fingers. Daniel, Black Creek Reserve, a key to a place I'd never heard of. My wife, the woman I knew better than myself, had a whole other life hidden in a locked box. The impossible ring on the wolf was no longer a supernatural terror. It was something far, far worse, a secret, and its roots were tangled in a past I knew nothing about. The pre-dawn light was a weak, gray wash against the window, doing little to chase away the shadows in the small living room. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table, the laptop casting a cold blue glow on his face. In front of him, laid out like evidence in a trial he was both prosecuting and defending, were the antique key and Alina's letter. The paper was already soft and creased from him folding and unfolding it a dozen times through the night. Daniel, the name was a splinter in his mind. He'd read the words until they were burned into his memory. This key is for you, our place at the Black Creek Reserve. A promise is a promise. Each phrase was a small, sharp betrayal. He had thought he knew every secret, every promise Alina had ever made. He had been so sure of the landscape of their life together, a map he thought they had drawn side by side. Now, he realized he'd been navigating with a page missing. A whole continent. The soft thump of small feet on the hallway floor made him flinch. He quickly folded the letter, slid it under his laptop, and palmed the key, shoving it deep into his jeans pocket. The metal was cold against his thigh. "Dad." Leo's voice was small, still thick with sleep. He stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his favorite stuffed bear clutched under one arm. "Are you working?" "Hey, buddy." "No, just reading the news." The lie was clumsy, tasting like ash in his mouth. "You hungry? I can make some pancakes." Leo nodded, shuffling over to his customary seat. As Caleb stood and moved to the counter, he felt his son's eyes on him. He forced his hands to be steady as he pulled out the mixing bowl, the flour, the eggs. The simple, domestic ritual felt like a performance. He was an actor on a stage, playing the part of dad, while his true self was a wreck of a man, lost in a storm of doubt and anger. "Dad, are you sad?" Leo asked, his voice clear and innocent. Caleb froze, his back to his son. He closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. "Always a little bit sad about Mom, buddy. You know that?" "No," Leo said, his tone insistent. "It's a different sad, like when I broke my arm, a hurting sad." Caleb turned, forcing a weak smile. He knelt in front of Leo, putting his hands on his small shoulders. "I'm okay, Leo, just tired, didn't sleep very well." He looked into his son's eyes, so much like Alina's, and felt a fresh wave of guilt. He was lying to him, hiding this ugly new reality. But how could he possibly explain it? "Your mother, the woman we both miss so much, had a secret life I never knew about." The thought was monstrous. After a mostly silent breakfast, where Caleb pushed pancake pieces around his plate, he set Leo up with cartoons in the living room. The electronic chatter of the TV was a thin veil over the roaring silence in his head. He returned to the laptop, the key in his pocket, a constant, heavy reminder. He typed Black Creek Reserve, New Mexico into the search bar. The results came up instantly. It wasn't a state park or a national forest. It was private land, a massive, rugged tract of wilderness about 90 miles east towards the Texas border. It had once been a high-end hunting and conservation reserve in the 80s and 90s, famous for its elk herds and pristine streams. But the website he found was dated, a relic of the early 2000s. It seemed the owners had run into financial trouble, and the reserve had closed to the public over a decade ago. It was now just a vast expanse of private property, largely unmanaged and patrolled only occasionally to keep trespassers out. The website had a grainy map showing a main gate and a few dirt service roads crisscrossing the thousands of acres. Our place. The words from the letter echoed in his mind. A cabin, a hidden spot by the creek. Whatever it was remote. Forgotten. the perfect place for a secret. Next came the harder part. Daniel. He typed Daniel and Alina Martinez into the search bar, his fingers hesitating over the keys. It felt like a profound violation of her memory. The results were a useless jumble of social media profiles for other Alinas, other Daniels. He tried adding their hometown, Taos. He scrolled through old high school alumni pages, news articles, public records. Nothing. The name was a ghost. Frustration mounted, hot and acidic. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. Who was he? A high school boyfriend she never got over? A college friend? He tried to picture him, but his mind could only conjure a faceless shadow standing next to his wife. A cold, bitter jealousy he hadn't felt in years, not even in their youth, coiled in his gut. He had trusted her completely. That trust had been the bedrock of his life. Now, that bedrock was fractured, and he felt like he was falling. He got up and walked to the mantelpiece, where a framed photo of him and Alina on their wedding day stood. Her smile was brilliant, radiant. He had always thought that smile was just for him. Now he scanned her face, looking for a hint of a lie, a shadow of the secret she was keeping. He found nothing but the woman he loved, and that was somehow worse. It made this feel impossible, a different reality bleeding into his own. His gaze fell back to the laptop screen, showing the map of the Black Creek Reserve. The key in his pocket felt heavier than ever. The online search for Daniel was a dead end. He could spend weeks, months chasing digital ghosts and come up with nothing. But the reserve was real. It was a physical place. And the key in his pocket was a physical object meant to open something there. The answer wasn't online. It was out there, 90 miles to the east, waiting in a place he never knew existed. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't live like this, haunted by a ghost with no name and a secret he couldn't comprehend. The uncertainty was eating him alive, poisoning every memory he had of his wife. But there was Leo. He couldn't drag his son on a 90-mile trip to break into a defunct nature reserve. It was dangerous and reckless, and Leo had been through enough trauma. He needed to go alone. His mind raced. He could ask their neighbor, Maria, to watch him. She was an older woman who had always been kind to them, doting on Leo since he was a baby. He hated to impose, hated to lie to her about where he was going. But what choice did he have? He couldn't say, "I have to go investigate my dead wife's secret affair." He'd have to invent a plausible excuse. A supply run to Santa Fe, an urgent errand, something boring, something believable. With a deep, shaky breath, Caleb picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over Maria's contact information. This was it. The next step. A journey into Alina's past, a past that could destroy the last, precious image he had of her. He pressed the call button, the sound of the ringing tone sealing his decision. He would get his answers, no matter what they were. The drive south was a blur of sagebrush and sky. The high desert landscape of northern New Mexico stretching out like a canvas of muted greens and dusty browns under the vast, indifferent blue. With every mile that put distance between me and Leo, a knot of guilt tightened in my gut. But the pull of the unknown, of Alina's secret, was stronger. I clutched the steering wheel, the worn leather cool beneath my tense grip, my mind a battlefield of memories and suspicions. The Alina in the letter felt like a stranger, and I was driving into her world, a place I never knew existed. Finding the Black Creek Reserve wasn't hard. Its location was marked on an old county map I'd found online. Getting in was another story. A rusted chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, sagged around the perimeter. A faded sign read, Black Creek Wildlife Reserve ESD, 1998 property of the state, no trespassing. The gate was secured with a heavy padlock that looked as old as the sign. I parked my truck half a mile down the dirt road, hidden by a copse of piñon pines, and walked back. A section of the fence had collapsed near an arroyo, and I slipped through, my heart pounding with the thrill of transgression. The reserve was a ghost. Buildings stood silent and sun-bleached, their windows like vacant eyes. Weeds choked the gravel paths. It was a place of forgotten purpose, slowly being reclaimed by the wild it was meant to contain. Elena's letter was my only guide. By the old research cabin, the one with the crooked porch near the dry well. I found it after 20 minutes of searching, set back from the other derelict structures. It was a small, simple cabin, its porch slanting like a tired old man. A stone-lined well, covered with weathered planks, sat nearby. The air was still, heavy with the scent of pine and decay. The cabin door was solid oak, its wood warped but holding strong. The lock was antique brass, tarnished green with age. My hand trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the keyhole with a grating sound, a noise that seemed to echo across the silent reserve. I turned it. With a loud, definitive clunk, the lock disengaged. I pushed the door open, stepping into a time capsule. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light slanting through a grimy window. The room was sparse. A simple desk, a broken chair, and shelves lined with rotting books on animal biology. Against the far wall sat a heavy-duty metal footlocker, secured not with a lock but with simple latches. My breath caught. This had to be it. I knelt and flipped the rusted latches. The lid creaked open. Inside, nestled on top of yellowed papers, was a small stack of photographs bound with a rubber band. My fingers felt clumsy as I picked them up. The first photo stole the air from my lungs. It was Elena, but younger, her face radiant and unlined, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her arm was slung around a young man with kind eyes and a wide smile. And between them, held in their arms, was a tiny wolf pup, all ears and paws. I sank back on my heels, the wooden floor groaning under my weight. I flipped through the other photos. Elena and the young man, Daniel, it had to be Daniel, releasing the growing wolf into a large enclosure. The wolf, now an adolescent, nuzzling Elena's hand through a fence. In one photo, the wolf had a distinctive V-shaped nick in its left ear. It was the same wolf, the wolf I had shot. Beneath the photos were several thin journals. I opened the first one. It was Elena's, her familiar, elegant script filling the pages. She wrote of her time as a biology intern at the reserve, of meeting Daniel, a fellow student who shared her passion. And she wrote about him. The wolf, they had found him as an abandoned pup, the sole survivor of his litter. They named him Lobo. They raised him, studied him, and loved him. The reserve was their shared world, a secret paradise. Daniel was her first love, a pure and innocent chapter of her life before we'd ever met. Her entries detailed their bittersweet decision to reintroduce Lobo to the wild when the reserve lost its funding and closed down. They made a promise to each other that they would never forget him, that a part of them would always run wild with him. Daniel eventually moved away to take a job in Oregon. Elena stayed, went back to school, and a few years later she met me. At the very bottom of the footlocker was one final, sealed envelope, addressed to Daniel in Elena's hand, but it was unposted. My hands shook as I tore it open. The letter was dated just 3 months before she died, long after her diagnosis. "My dearest Daniel," it began, "I don't know if I'll ever send this. I don't even know where you are anymore, but I had to write it. The doctors have told me I don't have much time left, and there are things a person needs to do. Loose ends to tie up. I have a wonderful life, a husband I love more than words can say, and a beautiful son who is my entire world. Caleb is my rock, my future. But you, Daniel, you were my past, and our promise, it's weighed on me. I came back here yesterday, to Black Creek. I had to see it one last time. I walked the old paths, and I thought he was long gone, a ghost of a memory. But then I saw him by the ridge. He's magnificent, the alpha of his own pack now. I knew it was him. He still has the little scar on his ear. He looked at me, and I swear for a second he remembered. I did something strange, something I can't explain, not even to myself. I took off my wedding ring, the symbol of this beautiful life I built after you. Caleb gave it to me. It is my most precious possession. I tied it to the old leather cord we used for his first tag, which was somehow still hanging around his neck. It felt right, like I was entrusting my past with the symbol of my present. A way of reconciling the girl who ran with wolves with the woman who became a wife and mother. It wasn't a betrayal of Caleb. It was an acknowledgement of my whole life. Please don't think it was anything more. I love him. My only regret is the time I won't have with him and our son. Goodbye, old friend. Live a wonderful life. Elena, I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. The crushing weight of betrayal, the anger, the confusion, it all evaporated, replaced by a wave of profound, aching sadness. It wasn't a secret lover or a hidden life. It was just Elena. Complex, beautiful, sentimental Elena, trying to make peace with her own mortality in the only way she knew how. She wasn't betraying me, she was honoring her entire journey. The wolf, Lobo, hadn't been attacking Leo. He had likely scented Elena's lingering presence on her son, a familiar echo from a lifetime ago, and was drawn by a memory I could never comprehend. My act of violence was born of a misunderstanding, a tragic, human error in a story that was never about me. I carefully packed the journals and the letter back into the footlocker, leaving only the photos. I closed the lid, stood up, and walked out of the cabin, leaving the door ajar. Let the wind and the dust have it back. Let the secrets rest. As I drove away from the Black Creek Reserve, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and pink. The ring was still in my pocket, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a clue to a mystery, but a relic of a love story, hers, mine, and the one I never knew. For the first time since she died, I felt the suffocating grip of my grief loosen, replaced by a simple, clean sorrow. I was finally mourning the whole woman, not just the wife I thought I knew. I had a long way to go, but the path was clear now. I was going home to my son, ready to tell him stories about his mother, the woman who loved him more than anything, the woman who once ran with wolves.